Ms. Cantwell, no. Mr. Tuberville, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, no. Mrs. Capito, aye. Mr. Johnson, aye. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. Scott of Florida, aye. Ms. Baldwin, no. Ms. Warren, no. Ms. Alsobrooks, no. Mr. Warnock, no. Mr. Markey, no. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mr. Schiff? No. Mr. Sheehy, aye. Mr. Wicker, aye. Mr. Van Hollen, no. Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. Budd, aye. Mr. Hickenlooper, no. Mr. Kelly, no. Ms. Slotkin, no. Mr. Schmidt, aye. Mr. McConnell, aye. Mrs. Moody, aye. Ms. Lummis, aye. Is that it for you guys? That's fine. Fine. Thank you.
I can tell you it's been different each time. I've had it, when we went, and this is the last 2 years in there, we just go right into it. If they say, they make the motion and stop, then they told me it was the other night, we did not.
On this vote, the yeas are 54, the nays are 45, 3/5 of the Senate duly chosen and sworn, having not voted in the affirmative, means the motion is not agreed to.
Mr. President.
The leader.
Mr. President, I enter a motion to reconsider.
The motion is entered.
Mr. President.
The minority leader.
I enter a motion to reconsider the failed cloture vote on the motion to proceed to calendar 167-2882.
The motion is entered.
Mr. President, I suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks. Mr. President?
Senator from Alaska is recognized.
Mr. President, I move to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I move to proceed to HJ Res 106.
The question is on the motion.
As for the yeas and nays,
Is there a sufficient second? It appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt-Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn. Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Curtis. Mr. Daines. Ms. Duckworth. Mr. Durbin. Ms. Ernst. Mr. Fetterman. Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Gallego. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Marino, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Badia, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Moreno, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Blackburn, Britt, Budd, Capito, Cornyn, Cotton, Crapo, Daines, Ernst, Graham, Haggerty, Hoven, Husted, Hyde-Smith, Kennedy, Lee, Marshall, Moran, Marino, Mullen, Ricketts, Rounds, Schmidt, Sullivan, and Young. Senators voting in the negative: also Brooks, Booker, Cantwell, Durbin, Fetterman, Hassan, Hirono, Kelly, Kim, Murray, Padilla, Rosen, Schatz, Schiff, Schumer, Smith, Warner, Warnock, Warren, and Wyden. Mr. Hickenlooper, no. Ms. Blunt-Rochester, no. Mr. Merkley, no. Mr. Bozeman, aye. Mr. Cassidy, aye. Mr. Lujan, no. Ms. Lummis, aye. Mr. Curtis, aye. Mrs. Fisher, aye. Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. Langford, aye. Mrs. Moody, aye. Ms. Baldwin, no. Ms. Cortez Masto, no. Mr. McCormick, aye. Mr. Kramer, aye. Ms. Collins, aye. Mr. Scott of Florida, aye. Mr. Tuberville, aye. Mr. Heinrich, no. Mr. Paul, aye. Mr. Markey, no. Mr. Grassley, aye. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. McConnell, aye. Mr. Welch, no. Mr. Barrasso, aye.
And I agreed to go in with it.
Mr. Scott of South Carolina, aye. Mr. Murphy, no. Mr. Risch, aye. Mr. Sheehy, aye. Mr. Banks, aye. Mr. Coons, no. Ms. Duckworth, no. Mr. Blumenthal, no. Mr. King, no. Mr. Bennett, no. Mr. Ossoff, No. Mr. Sanders, Mr. Sanders, no. Mrs. Gillibrand, Mrs. Gillibrand, no. Mr. Kane, no. Ms. Klobuchar, Ms. Klobuchar, no. Mr. Peters, no. Mr. Van Hollen, no. Ms. Slotkin, no. Mr. Justice, aye. Mr. Gallego, Mr. Gallego? No. Mr. Johnson, Mr. Johnson, aye. Mr. Whitehouse, no. Mr. Wicker, aye. Mrs. Shaheen, no. Mr. Reed, no.
On this vote, the yeas are 50, the nays are 47. The vote is agreed to. The motion is agreed to. The clerk will report.
HJ Res 106, providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title 5 and so forth.
Mr. President.
Recognize the senator from Kansas.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're now 9 days into the government shutdown, and the disruption of the shutdown is being felt by many Americans, and particularly in what I want to talk about is the many Americans who are traveling or working in the aviation industry. Government shutdowns are detrimental to some of our most basic functions of government, and our already fragile air traffic control system is facing strain from this occurrence. We're reminded how fragile our air system is by the facts of what occurred on January the 29th, when a flight from Kansas to Washington, D.C. claimed 67 lives. Mr. President, I ask for order. Thank you, Mr. President. We're reminded how fragile our air system is, how fragile our air safety system is, by what happened on January the 29th when a flight from Wichita, Kansas did not land safely at Washington Reagan, and it claimed the lives of 67 people. Over the time that I've been in Congress, we've had a number of shutdowns, and in many instances, even Kansans told me, shut her down, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter to me. I've never found the value in a government shutdown. That accident that I just mentioned forced Congress and our nation to reckon with an issue that's plagued us for decades. Why have we not effectively modernized our airspace system? Since that crash, steps have been taken to train more controllers and enhance the aviation system, including $12.5 billion investment in modernizing our airspace. But those efforts become much more difficult while Congress fails to keep government operating, and the shutdown is in place. The Wall Street Journal just this week aptly summed up the current crisis, stating, we quote, have a system under pressure and now just another 100 pounds of weight on it. The failure to pass a continuing resolution is slowing, and it's slowly crushing our aviation system. Our system is too fragile and the stakes are too high for us to continue operating the national aviation system in the manner we are doing so. We will reach a breaking point, and this could result in the closing of our airspace or portions of it. The consequences of the shutdown on our aviation system aren't isolated to major cities and large airports. The viability of the Essential Air Service program is also now put at risk. This program incentivizes airlines to provide commercial flights to rural communities that normally wouldn't be able to attract business from major airlines on their own. In Kansas, there are 5 such airports who use this program to provide flights to their communities. These flights allow my constituents to fly to larger cities for business, to see the family, to make doctor's appointments, and so many other things. Several of these airports have seen and continue to see record levels of passenger growth. All these factors are chipping away at the sustainability and safety of our nation's aviation system. In the previous Congress, I introduced the Aviation Funding Stability Act, which allows the FAA to draw from Airport and Airway Trust Fund to make certain that critical operations can continue when there is an appropriation lapse. In March of this year, I reintroduced this bill as we face this threat of a shutdown. And this legislation is still important. But the fact is, the only real solution here is to pass the continuing resolution. We set out earlier this year in a bipartisan manner to transform our aviation system and to make it safer for everyone, but that work is now significantly hindered without an open and functioning government. The Senate Appropriations Subcommittee, on which I'm a member, the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Subcommittee, has done its job. I join my colleagues in advancing the FY 2026 funding bill for the Department of Transportation, but including all the aviation matters at the FAA and otherwise. We did that in July. It included more than $22 billion for the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, with $5 billion for the FAA's Facilities and Equipment account, critically funding modernizing outdated equipment in our national airspace. This legislation also included funding to hire 2,500 air traffic controllers to close the gap in our workforce. Every day we remain in a shutdown, the air traffic controller shortage gets worse and the strain on the aviation system intensifies. Our system has a breaking point, and I hope that this dysfunction that we are undergoing, I hope it stops before we see dramatic and damaging consequences. Mr. President, my point is that the continuing resolution is standing in the way of the appropriations process. We have a majority leader who is willing to bring appropriation bills to the floor. They deserve the Senate consideration of those appropriation bills. The challenge we faced was getting them done by the end of the fiscal year, and therefore we put in place a continuing resolution till a date in later November. This is a straightforward continuing resolution to give us the time to complete the appropriations process, including the money for the Transportation Department and the safety components that are included therein. My second point is that a continuing resolution is necessary to avoid a shutdown. And that point is that the shutdown is damaging it to us in many ways, to our nation. It's broadly damaging to us because it allows those who are critics, those who are adversaries, to realize that we're not as capable of functioning as we should be, and even our allies wonder what's going on in the United States. The point I want to make, there are consequences to the position we are allowed ourselves to get in, and it affects the safety of Americans every day. And having experienced the loss of life from the flight on January 29th from Wichita, Kansas to Washington, D.C., we should be doing everything we can to make certain that our air traffic system and the necessary components are in place to make sure that the traveling American citizens and the citizens of the world who use our airline system have a safe and secure flight when they board a plane in the United States. And the silliness of where we are today is impeding our ability to make that true. I don't know when a shutdown makes sense, but the consequences of this one, a short-term clean CR for a few more weeks to complete our appropriation works, a shutdown makes absolutely no sense for the benefit of America. I urge my Democratic colleagues to act now to pass this short-term continuing resolution so we can alleviate the pressures on our aviation system, return to doing our jobs and appropriating government funding, and provide much-needed certainty and stability for our nation. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Recognize the senator from Washington State.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we are just over a week into Republicans' shutdown and just over 3 weeks from open enrollment, when massive premium hikes become a stone-cold reality for our families. And yet Republican leaders refuse to sit down and talk with us about addressing both of those challenges. President Trump and Russ Vought are just gleefully plotting how we can make this shutdown as painful as possible. House Republicans are not even here for the 3rd week in a row, and Leader Thune has refused to do anything other than vote on the same failed partisan CR over and over and over. The clock is ticking. Republicans would rather sit on their hands than sit down at the table. When we asked to talk about health care, the only word that the Republican leader seems to know is later. Excuse me, but why shouldn't we address this challenge any earlier? The Republican leader bent over backwards to shovel new tax cuts at billionaires earlier this year. He did not tell CEOs to wait when it came to Republican tax breaks that expire at the end of this year. Why is he telling families now to wait, when rates are being set now, when price announcements will be in the mail any day now, and when open enrollment is right around the corner? Why do Republicans want to wait until higher rates are locked in and families are priced out of health care? We have to tackle this before those rates are locked. I have been warning for months about what this will mean for Washington State and for our country. Maybe the Republican leader needs to hear about what this means for his constituents. In South Dakota, there are 50,000 people who rely on the health care tax credits to get their health coverage. On average, those South Dakota families will see their premiums more than triple if Republicans refuse to save the tax credits. These are hardworking families, including many farmers. And that's not just a challenge in South Dakota. Over a quarter of farmers in our country are covered through those exchanges. Do any of my colleagues think we should do nothing while farmers lose their health care? Do any of my colleagues want to stand by while families across the country see their premiums double? You know, we have common ground here, but that doesn't do any good when Republicans outright refuse, to come to the table and negotiate. It doesn't do a lot of good when House Republicans are out on vacation for the 3rd week in a row. You know, this clock has been ticking all year long, and the time to avoid those massive premiums is just about up. There is no waiting, there is no later. You can either start talking with us now to reopen the government and act to stop premium hikes before the open enrollment, or you can talk to your constituents about why you decided to sit on your hands and do diddly squat as their premiums went through the roof. The choice is yours. Democrats are here. We are still at the table. We have always been here. We have never left, and we are ready today, to work out a serious deal to address the health care crisis and reopen the government. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alston-Brooks.
President.
Recognize the senator from Hawaii.
Mr. President, right now, Republicans control...
We're in a quorum call.
Pardon, we're in a quorum
Quorum
call? I ask unanimous consent to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection?
Okay. Mr. President, right now, Republicans control the White House, the House, and the Senate. In other words, Republicans control the federal government. Since day one of the Trump regime, they have used that control to sow chaos and attack programs and services that the American people rely upon. Here are but two examples. Earlier this year, Trump tried to shut down Social Security offices across the country, making it much harder for recipients of Social Security benefits to call Social Security, find out the information they needed, and to access their benefits. So Social Security reversed course on this, I call it lame brain idea, to close some of the offices when they responded to the huge hue and cry from people who said that that is not something that should be happening to the Social Security recipients. Another example, this regime slashed the Department of Education, firing more than half of the federal education department's staff as part of an all-out assault on the federal support for public education in our country. Now, if President Trump had his way, he would just get rid of the Federal Department of Education altogether, but since only Congress can do that, they did things like firing half of the staff. So now they're coming after programs millions of Americans rely on for their health care. Republicans created this health care crisis when they passed their big, ugly bill, which guts Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, among other programs. At the same time, Donald Trump zeroed out funding for research into diseases such as cancer. And when you're talking about research on children's cancer, you know, to cut out funding for that kind of research is more than mean. So he also cut out funding for research in diabetes and Alzheimer's. So halting studies that could unlock major breakthroughs and literally save lives. Unsurprisingly, the majorities of Americans oppose what this regime is doing regarding health care. So Republicans know their position is indefensible, which is why they're resorting to lies and excuses, lies that get more desperate by the day. They're lying because they don't want the American people to know the truth. And what is that truth? The truth is that Republicans are happy to make permanent massive tax cuts for billionaires in their big, ugly bill, but refused to make permanent tax credits hardworking families rely on to get their health care. Misplaced priorities are nothing new for Republicans. I was in the House when we passed the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, which expanded health care to more than 20 million Americans who up to that point did not even have health care. I was also here in the Senate as Republicans tried over and over again to repeal the ACA and kick those millions of Americans off their health care. It's rich that these same Republicans who crusaded for years to get rid of the ACA now stand before the American people talking about how much they care about their health care. Why should the American people believe these lies as they are, even as we speak, getting notices of the huge increases in their health care costs? American people don't believe the Republican lies. They see right through them. So meanwhile, the Republicans, unwilling to do what the American people want, now claim that, well, expanding these credits isn't urgent, that we can do this a few months from now. We don't have to do it now. There is no sense of urgency. Another lie. Mr. President, time is of the essence. Open enrollment under the ACA starts in just a few weeks, and because of Republicans' refusal to act, I repeat, people across the country are getting notices saying, here's what your ACA premiums are going to cost you. And the figures are astounding. Without an extension of these credits, average out-of-pocket premium costs for a family of 4 in Hawaii are expected to increase from $10,000 to more than $16,000 a year, an increase of more than $6,000 or $500 a month. Well, maybe in Trump's world, $500 isn't much, but to everybody else, that is a lot. You know, billionaires may not care that millions of people in our country are getting these notices about their increase in health care, but the rest of us do. And for so many families, these huge increases could well break the bank. Let's face it, this is not a red state or blue state issue. Hardworking Americans in every state across the country rely on the ACA for health care coverage. And they're all about to see their costs skyrocket. In Speaker Johnson's home state of Louisiana, where nearly 300,000 people, his constituents, get their health care through the ACA, a family of 4 in Louisiana can expect to see their premiums increase by more than $9,000 a year. In South Dakota, Senate Leader Thune's home state, out-of-pocket costs for a family of 4 will increase by more than $13,000 a year. Think about that. Without action, Leader Thune's constituents will be paying $13,000 more than last year for the very same coverage and same benefits. Nationwide, it is estimated that healthcare premiums will more than double for hardworking families. Make no mistake, plenty of families won't be able to afford these significant hikes and will be forced to go without healthcare, all because Republicans refuse to act. Working families are awakening to this healthcare crisis because, and I repeat, they are getting their increased notices even as we speak. And they know who's responsible. It's the Republicans with their big, ugly bill. Mr. President, Trump returned to office promising to lower costs on day one. Yet another lie. Not happening. More than 250 days later, Americans are facing the fallout from this regime's reckless economic policies, including the disastrous tariffs that are decimating small businesses. So instead of actually doing anything to lower costs for our hardworking families, the Republicans have shut down the government because they really don't care that families have to pay so much more for health care, and many of them, millions of them, are going to drop health care because they will not be able to afford these increases. So under the Trump regime, Americans are poor because notice that costs are not going down, and they are about to get sicker when they no longer can afford the health care that was provided through the ACA tax credits. Democrats, on the other hand, know that the health and welfare and well-being of the American people are worth fighting for, that keeping the government running shouldn't come at the cost of Americans' health care. I mean, talk about what I would call a completely stupid choice. It's not even a choice. We should keep government running, but if the Republicans are so intent on giving permanent tax breaks to the billionaires, they should give the permanent tax credits to the millions of Americans who need and deserve this health care. So frankly, Republicans can end the government shutdown today if they agree to restore health care to the American people. And until then, Democrats are going to keep fighting to protect Americans' health care, reopen the government, and hold this regime accountable for the harm that they are inflicting on this country every single day. Mr. President, I yield back.
Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, one of the proudest moments of my life was the first time I ever laced up my boots, put on my uniform, and raised my right hand to swear my oath to the Constitution as a member of the Illinois Army National Guard. And I cherished every day that I got to wake up and call myself a soldier. And it's because I love our military so deeply that I refuse to let a 5-time draft-dodging coward abuse it for his own personal gain. At Quantico last week, Trump told our top military leaders that he wants American service members to train against the same citizens they swear an oath to protect. Last month, he essentially declared war on Chicago, one of the largest cities in the country that he leads, with a meme from a Vietnam War movie about the loss of humanity when military action is unchecked by ethics or the laws of war. And this week, he made good on his threats, forcing hundreds of National Guardsmen into our city against the will of the people of Illinois or its legally elected representatives. For months, Trump has fabricated claims of chaos and crime on American streets to justify false claims that there is a need to deploy troops into our cities against local officials' wishes. First to LA, then DC, and he isn't stopping there. He's also attempting to deploy troops to Portland, though a federal judge he appointed blocked his efforts there twice, because in his own handpicked appointees' words, Trump's claims about why they are needed were untethered to facts. Another way to put that is that he is lying. In the last few weeks in Chicago, we've seen Trump's agents detain innocent Americans, deny citizens their right to legal representation, point weapons at civilians, zip-tie children, arrest elected officials, ransack apartment buildings, injure journalists, and shoot a priest in the head with pepper balls for the so-called crime of peacefully praying for nonviolence. They've even shot 2 people, leaving one, a father of 2 young children, dead, making dubious and unsubstantiated claims in their attempt to justify their use of lethal force. It's obvious what Trump is doing. He's targeting and punishing the cities who dare push back against his abuse of power. And while he's currently targeting blue cities with his lies, if these deployments are not stopped, there will be nothing to stop him or any future president from doing this to anyone, anywhere, for any made-up reason that is also untethered to reality. So let's be clear. Ordering our troops to intimidate Americans in their own communities doesn't make our nation safer. Policing Americans in their own communities is not the National Guard's job. They can't make arrests, and they're not adequately trained to carry out police duties in urban environments. These deployments are yet another Trump move straight out of the authoritarian 101 textbook. They further jeopardize civil rights while distracting our troops from executing their core mission of keeping Americans safe from the real adversaries who wish us harm. We know that Trump's actions are not about law and order, because if he cared about law and order, he wouldn't gleefully refuse to coordinate with state and local officials. He wouldn't have literally defunded our police by freezing and slashing federal dollars that help hire, train, and equip law enforcement. He wouldn't be diverting federal resources and agents away from operations that investigate drug cartels and gun traffickers, from missions that identify and disrupt foreign terrorist plots, and from actions that protect our families from cyber attacks to do it. But he is. And instead of supporting and expanding proven violence crime prevention strategies, he's wasting millions of taxpayer dollars to terrorize law-abiding citizens who are exercising their First Amendment rights. Trump is taking our troops away from their missions just to do his personal bidding, forcing them to confront peacefully protesting Americans instead of using their time preparing to protect our nation in case of future conflicts with America's adversaries around the world. Our troops didn't sign up for this. They signed up to defend Americans' rights to free speech, not to intimidate Americans from exercising that right. Our troops were willing to die to defend this country, not to defend one man's ego. Los Angeles did not ask for this. Washington, D.C. did not ask for this. Portland did not ask for this. Chicago did not ask for this. Our service members do not deserve this. I'm relieved to announce that just moments ago, I secured a Senate hearing in the coming weeks with witnesses from the Trump administration where I will ask tough questions and demand answers on these unjustifiable actions. Because I refuse to stay silent as our military and our service members' sacrifices are disrespected and abused by a man who was never brave enough to serve himself. I cannot let him keep giving our troops the middle finger while eroding the hard-won trust and confidence they've earned from the American public over generations of military service. These days, I may no longer be wearing my Army uniform, but it still hangs proudly in my Senate office. And now I spend a lot of my time seated on the Senate floor rather than beneath my Blackhawks main rotors. But my core mission is still the same as when I was in the National Guard, to keep America as strong and as safe as she should be, if only Donald Trump cared about doing the same. With that, I yield the floor and recognize my colleague, the senior senator from the great state of Illinois.
Mr. President,
Democrat Whip.
I want to thank my colleague from Illinois, Senator Duckworth, for inviting me to join her on the floor to discuss what's happening in our state. And before I do, I want to make sure it is well known for those who are following this debate to explain how she became my Senate colleague. There was a day some 20 years ago when I was given 2 tickets to the presidential State of the Union address. And my staff asked me if there was any particular guest I'd like to invite. I said, no, why don't you call out to Walter Reed Military Hospital and see if there's an Illinois veteran who can come and join us. They told me shortly after that they'd found someone who was coming. I didn't know that person. Her name was Tammy Duckworth, and she was in full dress uniform when she came into my office. It had been merely a few weeks since her helicopter had been shot down over Iraq, and she had gone through some terrible surgeries and recovery. But she came into my office with a large smile on her face and her husband, Brian, pushing her wheelchair. That was how we met. She was my guest at the State of the Union address. We became friends. I became the ombudsman for Walter Reed. She had soldiers calling me from all over the United States asking for help, and I didn't regret it one bit. It was an honor to do it. So I worked up the courage to ask her if she would consider running for Congress, and she said to me, I'd have to talk it over with Brian. And I thought, I've got a live one here. She sounds like she's interested, and she was. Her first try for office was not successful for Congress, but she later became head of the Veterans Administration for the state of Illinois, and then ran successfully to serve with me in Congress as a member of the House. When there was a vacancy available for the U.S. Senate seat, I not only encouraged her, but endorsed her and did everything I could to help. I'm honored to have her as my colleague. She's an extraordinary person, has more bravery than any 10 people I know. And she has shown her devotion to this country by serving in the Guard for over 20 years, 23 years? 23 years in the Guard. So when it comes to issues involving the Guard, there's no better expert who's ever served in the United States Senate. Illinois is lucky, America's lucky to have Tammy Duckworth, and I'm lucky to be able to join her today. We're proud of our heritage in the state of Illinois. We call it the land of Lincoln. And I recall an incident that's worth repeating. In 1858, Abraham Lincoln gave a speech in Edwardsville, Illinois. That's downstate near St. Louis. In this speech, he asked, quote, what constitutes the bulwark of our liberty and independence? Lincoln emphasized that it was not America's army or the power of our weapons. The founder of the Republican Party, Abraham Lincoln, said that it is, quote, the preservation of the spirit which prizes liberty as the heritage of all men in all lands everywhere. This is what is responsible for the maintenance of our freedoms. How the Republican Party has changed from those early days. Yesterday, President Trump deployed 500 National Guard troops to our state of Illinois. The president ignored the pleas from elected officials across Illinois that these deployments were unnecessary, unwanted, and a dangerous escalation of a situation the president himself has created. Leaders of the Chamber of Commerce and businesses in our state held a press conference and begged the president, don't send in the troops. You're peddling a message which is not true. It is not unsafe in Illinois. People there are proud to be part of that state. We know we're not perfect. Like every other place, we can be better and safer, but the use of Guard troops from Illinois or even from Texas is totally unnecessary and creates the wrong impression. That message was clear from the business leaders in my state, but President Donald Trump didn't care what they had to say. He wanted to deploy our nation's military to Illinois to spread fear and sow chaos. And in both those efforts, sad to say, he's succeeding. The president has no legal basis for deploying federal troops to Illinois against the wishes of the Illinois governor. There is no rebellion or insurrection happening in our state. Americans have the right under the First Amendment to protest this administration's cruel and misguided immigration policy. There is no room for violence whatsoever in this exchange of information and points of view, but it is part of our constitutional guarantee. And there is no argument, as some of my colleagues claim during our Judiciary Committee markup meeting this morning, that this is anything like the civil rights era of uses of National Guard by multiple presidents to enforce desegregation laws when segregationist governors in the South were defying federal law and court orders. President Dwight David Eisenhower, a general himself, federalized the Arkansas National Guard after the governor outright refused to comply with the law and was preventing the Little Rock Nine from entering previously all-white Central High School, following the Supreme Court's ruling in Brown versus Board of Education. There is no argument, no evidence whatsoever that the governor of Illinois is disobeying any federal law or court order. There is no historical analogy between the situation in the 1970s, 60s rather, and the situation in Illinois today. In fact, the current administration has sued Illinois to attempt to commandeer state and local law, state law, and force Illinois to implement this administration's immigration policies. Courts have repeatedly found that Illinois does not have a responsibility to implement federal immigration laws. There is no statute or provision of the Constitution that allows the president to use the National Guard as props in his political theater or to suppress constitutionally protected dissent against his inhumane immigration crackdown. In addition, the Trump administration has recklessly surged hundreds of federal law enforcement officers who are employing increasingly aggressive tactics against immigrants and their families and those suspected of being immigrants. They have said quite boldly, we are looking for people who look like they're subject to our jurisdiction. They have pulled FBI, DEA, and ATF agents from their assignments to carry out the president's immigration agenda, taking them away from their mission to combat crimes like terrorism, gun violence, human trafficking, and drug smuggling. How does this make America safer? We all know the litany that Donald Trump has repeated over and over again at political rallies and meetings since he was reelected as president. He is trying to stop murderers, rapists, terrorists, criminally insane people, and sexual predators from coming into this country. Look what's happening with this mass deportation effort that he's authored. Over 70% of those who have been detained by ICE so far, over 70%, have no criminal record whatsoever, none whatsoever. This is not about stopping crime. This is about going after immigrants. If the Trump administration truly wanted to help my city of Chicago and our state of Illinois, it wouldn't defy Illinois elected leaders. It would work with us. It would restore the millions of dollars it suspended in crime prevention and public safety grants. How can this president say with a straight face that he wants to reduce crime in our state and cut back the very programs that law enforcement counts on to train and be prepared and be effective in the field in reducing crime? He's chosen to put boots and guns on our street and to call in the military from Texas. At the end of the day, these deployments are about President Trump and Stephen Miller's personal agenda to send troops primarily into blue cities and to deport immigrants without any criminal history at the expense of national security and public safety. Nearly a quarter of all FBI agents, a quarter of them, 1 out of 4, are now focused on immigration. How can this possibly make America safer? And the tactics that are being used by ICE and others in support of the president's mission are outrageous. On Tuesday, September 30th, there was a raid in the middle of the night on an apartment house in South Shore in the city of Chicago. 300 ICE agents flew in Black Hawk helicopters and rappelled down to the roof of an apartment building. It was a scene made for the movies, and that's exactly what it was. They ransacked the apartments of the people living there, crashed down their doors and pulled them out of bed, lined them up in the street. They bound the children with ties, plastic ties like handcuffs, and they decided to make it all a movie production for television and video. It was supposedly to stop drug activities by gangs. No evidence whatsoever has been produced to that. It was a horrible scene. I'm sure these children will never forget as long as they live. Being pulled out of bed in the middle of the night and watching your parents being interrogated, arrested, and detained. That is the idea of this administration of enforcing the law. It just goes too far. Steve Miller, the president's domestic advisor, is the architect of this travesty. For any of you who think that these deployments may not affect you, it's just Illinois' problem, you're wrong. The very act undermines our Constitution and the belief in liberty above all. As President Lincoln warned us in that same speech in Edwardsville, destroy this spirit of liberty and you planted the seeds of despotism at your own doors. While the Guard is in Illinois now, it could be in your state next. It could be your family taken from their homes and their beds in the middle of the night in an indiscriminate raid. Does it sound preposterous? 2200 South Shore apartment building people can tell you it's not preposterous. It's actually what happened. Have tear gas and guns pointed at you for speaking out. Congress must act and speak out against this increasingly authoritarian administration. We are a co-equal branch of government, and it's time we acted like one. I implore my Republican colleagues, I know their loyalty to President Trump, but I implore them to join Senator Duckworth and myself and describe these deployments for what they are: an illegal, immoral power grab by a president determined to consolidate his power and stifle any dissent. If we here in this Senate chamber, fortunate enough to represent the people of this country, will not stand up, then who will? Mr. President, once again, I want to thank my colleague, Senator Duckworth, for calling us down to the Senate floor to raise this issue. She and I are hoping that if the Senate schedule allows, we'll be able to get back to Illinois this weekend and have an opportunity to learn even more about this grave situation. In the meantime, I ask people involved to show courage, to understand that the odds are against them, and the people who are trying to harass them are well armed and can be very serious in what they do. But America's values will prevail over this president, over this situation, and my state of Illinois will return to a situation where it's not being invaded by the Guard of other states. Incidentally, let me close by saying this. I have no animus against the members of the Guard, either in Illinois or in Texas. They are good men and women who put their hands in the air and swore an oath to our Constitution and to serve our country. They are in a situation where they are being used, unfortunately, for a bad circumstance for this president. But we need them, and I continue to look forward to working with them in the future. I yield the floor.
President. Senator from Connecticut. Mr. President, last year I was privileged to lead a bipartisan delegation of 20 of our colleagues to Normandy, celebrating the 80th anniversary of the historic landing there, where American boys, and they were boys, 17 and 18 years old, stormed the beaches of France to liberate Europe. It was one of the most moving experiences of my lifetime, and I believe the presiding officer was there. We were part of a bipartisan group, evenly divided, 10 Republicans and 10 Democrats. And what we heard and saw, I think, will stay with us for a lifetime, particularly from the veterans who remembered that day. They're in their 100-year-old ages of their lives. And after speaking to them, we heard speeches from the President of the United States, of France, leaders of Europe, but what stuck with me was what I heard from the veterans, and one of them said to me, "This was our moment. This was our moment." We walked through the American cemetery, those silent rows of white grave markers, down to the beach, Omaha Beach, where I thought of those 18 and 20-year-old boys jumping out of landing craft with 80 pounds on their backs into 8 feet of water under a hail of machine gun bullets and mortar fire, onto a beach 3 football fields long. 3 football fields long, without any cover. There are no trees, there are no dunes, and the hail of gunfire and mortars kept coming. I think 90% died in the first wave, maybe 80% in the second. They kept going. A third and a fourth wave, storming the cliffs, taking back Europe, and saving democracy. And I kept thinking as I walked on that bleak beach, windswept, waves crashing, that was our moment. I kept thinking about the veteran who said that to me. It was an American moment. And our reason for going to Normandy was to honor those young men who saved democracy. Mr. President, this is our moment. This is our moment to save democracy. I know it sounds like an exaggeration to say that our democracy is now under attack, but it is from adversaries and enemies abroad, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. But we also have to make sure that we safeguard our liberties at home against attack and efforts to undermine them, even if some may feel they are well-meaning. And one of them, and only one of them, is the illegal and unconstitutional use of our military and the deployment of National Guard into American cities to do what local law enforcement, our police, and others state
for households and military readiness alike. Military readiness. Many families have already begun to visit food banks near bases. And it's even harder on families with a loved one who's deployed. Amy Palmer, who runs an organization that helps military families in Colorado, said families of the deployed, and I quote, are having to navigate this alone. They're used to getting the paycheck and paying bills on behalf of their entire family. And with that service member deployed and not really having that support system from them, it is really hard, end quote. Well, Mr. President, it's not just our troops who are going to be missing a paycheck. Civilian workers will also be missing part of their pay starting this Friday, including law enforcement officers like the members of our very own Capitol Police. Food banks and other nonprofits around the country are bracing for increased demand from federal employees, especially here in the National Capital Region. I remember when a Democrat leader was a passionate opponent of government shutdowns because of their impact on federal workers. I'm pretty sure that was just about 6 months ago. Other Democrats used to be concerned about the impact on federal workers as well. A few years ago, our Democrat colleague from New Jersey, himself a former career federal worker, had this to say, and I quote, I worked through multiple shutdowns, including, having to work and show up every day without getting paid. I mean, it's just so scary to think of the fact that this is going to hurt people, end quote. Yet Democrats aren't showing the slightest interest in reopening the government to ensure our troops and federal employees get paid. Mr. President, later today, we're going to have another vote on the clean continuing resolution to open up the government. As I said, we are a handful of Democrats away from passing this continuing resolution and reopening the government. A handful of votes away from paying our troops. And we're going to see if that matters to Democrats. We'll see if Democrats choose to pay America's troops or if they once again bow to the demands of their far-left base, which is telling them to hold out, or to their strategists who tell them that they're, quote, winning the shutdown. Well, based on the reporting this morning, Democrats couldn't care less whether military families miss a paycheck tomorrow. In an interview posted this morning, the Democrat leader said, every day gets better for us. Every day gets better for us. Mr. President, this isn't a political game. Democrats might feel that way, but I don't know of anybody else that does. Mr. President, the longer this goes on, the more the American people realize the Democrats own this shutdown. A Morning Consult poll finds that, and I quote, voters increasingly blame Democrats for the government shutdown, end quote. In the latest Harvard-Harris poll, 65% of voters think Democrats should reopen the government instead of holding out for their partisan demands. But Democrats are apparently being told to hold the line by their far-left base, and so this shutdown drags on. Mr. President, we can solve the issue of troop pay and every other problem we're seeing today, by passing this clean, nonpartisan CR and sending it to the President. He's ready to sign it. If Democrats would only agree, we could reopen the government in just a few hours, literally. Pay our troops, pay our federal workers, and stop this madness and this notion that somehow in this political game, the Democrats believe, according to their leader, that every day gets better for us. That, Mr. President, is not the experience of the American people. It's time to end this shutdown, to reopen this government. Let's pass this CR today. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
I recognize the Democrat leader.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be dispensed with.
The senator is recognized.
Mr. President, last night, nearly 2 years to the day of Hamas's vicious attack on October 7th, after nearly 2 long years of devastating war in Gaza, it appears that a ceasefire and hostage agreement has been reached. If this agreement is implemented, then finally, after 2 years of immense suffering, the hostages could soon be free. There could be a ceasefire, and the victims of this painful conflict can start to rebuild their lives. This brings a huge sigh of relief to the hostage families, to all of Israel, and to Palestinians who have suffered for so long in this horrific humanitarian catastrophe. Now we await details and final acceptance and implementation from all parties of the first phase. And we must begin the even harder work of closing negotiations to end the war, to start building the day after in Gaza without Hamas, to surge humanitarian assistance to Palestinians in Gaza, and to build a lasting peace that ensures security and dignity for Israelis and Palestinians alike. This morning, I hope and pray that all of the hostages are released, including the deceased hostages. I will never give up until all the hostages are home, including the remains of my constituents, Omer Nutra and Itai Chen. I've gotten to know their families well over the last 2 years, and I share their desperation to bring them home for proper burial and closure. The work is not over, but any step to end this nightmare is one that should be celebrated and carefully implemented. Now on the shutdown and the Trump administration. The federal government has now been shut down for more than a week, but Donald Trump, Speaker Johnson, and Republicans in Congress are nowhere to be found. Instead of playing with people's lives, Donald Trump and Republican leaders in Congress need to sit down with Democrats and have a serious negotiation to fix health care and reopen the government at once. Workers are starting to miss out on paychecks. Seniors are worried about delays at the Social Security Administration. Small business with government contracts are in the dark. We need to end this shutdown as soon as possible. Every day that Republicans refuse to negotiate to end this shutdown, the worse it gets for Americans, and the clearer it becomes who's fighting for them. Each day, our case to fix health care and end the shutdown gets better and better, stronger and stronger, because families are opening their letters, showing how high their premiums will climb if Republicans get their way. They're seeing why this fight matters. It's about protecting their health care, their bank accounts, their futures. But Republicans are absent. The House is literally on vacation. And Donald Trump, meanwhile, continues to play with people's lives and threaten mass layoffs for federal workers. Yesterday, the Wall Street Journal reported that Republican leaders in Congress have been urging the administration not to follow through with their threats of mass layoffs and no back pay for furloughed federal workers. The Journal wrote, quote, that far-reaching government cuts and firings could backfire with the public. And aides have been, quote, warning that such moves could cause voters to blame Republicans for the shutdown. That's the